Good morning and happy new year, or let's hope a happier new year for a lot of us. We're looking forward to 2021 for a number of reasons. Welcome to Foul First Thursday. That's Friends of the Waccamaw Library, our wonderful friends group, and we're thrilled for their support on all levels. And thank you to our president, our Foul president, Diane Stern, our treasurer, Mr. Otto, and all our wonderful Foul volunteers and structure. So if you're not a member of Foul, please join up. We need you, and they've been so great, especially during this time of pandemic. They've been keeping us going on all levels in spirit, as well as with all their volunteer work. And there is the Foul store online. The physical store isn't open, but online you can go and get your items there. So please keep supporting our friends of the Waccamaw Library that way. And this series, the First Thursday series, started by wonderful Jill Santopietro. And so I'm trying to keep that momentum going. And today for January, we have a wonderful guest, John Rowley, and he's going to talk to us about Championship Zen, Secrets of Winning Politics. So a very, very timely topic, and we'll get into some very current events, including some goings on yesterday, but he's been very busy. John has over the last few days and last 4 years, I guess we would say. But John Rowley, he is a political strategist and has served on over 500 campaigns in 47 states, including races for president and governor, all the way down to your local city council. So John is founder of CounterPoint Messaging, based in Nashville, Tennessee, and John Rowley has provided political analysis on MSNBC, CNBC, CNN, Fox News, and NPR, among many other venues. So if his face looks familiar, that's probably why, and his voice. You've probably seen him out there giving political commentary. He will discuss how team-building strategies drawn from sports present creative plans for navigating current politics and political campaigns. So he's here with a particular purpose, sports and politics. How do those mesh and fit together? So John's been on MSNBC, CNN, NPR, and now John can add GLC, Georgetown County Library, since this is going countywide, and FOWL, Foul, to your list. Impressive media appearances. So we're delighted and honored to host John Rowley here. And I should say that this is a book in development. John is working on this connection between sports and politics. So he is a writer as well and has published out there on Medium and other sources. Also, let me remind you, please, if you're out there watching on Facebook Live right now, go and put any questions you have, type them into the comments box, and we'll ask them to John on air. So after we get finished talking, we will ask your questions so you can talk directly to John Rowley and get his expertise. All right, so welcome, John. Good to see you.
Thanks a million. I appreciate the introduction, and it's much more thoughtful sort of conversation I anticipate here than when you go on CNN or Fox News. So these appearances are a little bit more gratifying to the soul than the others. But I have updated my LinkedIn to add that at your suggestion. So
thank you, John. Yeah. Hopefully we will live up to your expectations. We'll try. And I see you've worn a neutral kind of green color. I've gotten my red, white, and blue, and Heather Pelham has decorated our set beautifully here with the colors of the American flag, red, white, and blue. And Heather is our wonderful videographer, among many other things, with the library. And we also have Truman Wins here, who I know has helped with the tech, get you going. So we should give props to them before we get going. They do a fantastic job. So John, to start off here, you've been, as we said, a veteran political strategist and media campaign specialist. You're highly accomplished in your field. So why sports? Why is this such a, why do you think this is such a powerful metaphor and useful one for politics? What's the connection between sports and politics for you?
Well, I work on the political campaign side in politics, so I'm not working for the government and whatnot. And so the political campaign sphere is very Darwinian. These are short-term startup businesses that have to start, raise money, and come to an end. And the teams that are put together have to be put together quick, often don't come back together again. And the sort of teams that you have are people who have, like Navy SEAL style skill sets, but a lifestyle more like a Bedouin, to where they're moving around the country, helping different candidates and different parties. And so, I mean, we really live in the world of putting teams together, trying to motivate them. And I've had a lifelong interest in just how do you motivate people? How do you create a great team? And in business or sports or in other places, there's really two kinds of analogies or stories: sports stories and analogies, or war stories. I mean, I've been to some library board meetings, but library board meetings aren't necessarily the great analogies, or pre-K, visits with your teacher. Those aren't the great analogies that people can take into other venues. And so, politics and sports, competitive, contentious, high profile, memorable. And so I saw a lot of things that happened in sports, of coaches interacting with players, that helped us as we were consultants interacting with different candidates around the country.
Yeah. And so that competitive drive and that's part of it that you're talking about. But you also are talking about the coaches and the team building and how quickly you have to do it. And it's always switching out.
Right. Exactly. Well, and I guess it used to be, 30, 40 years ago, when I got interested in sports, your teams would be together for a long period of time. And so I think there's also kind of a question right now of, as we have more one and done players, as you have more free agency in professional sports, I think the kind of the short-lived team building is maybe as appropriate in the campaign world versus the sports world. And again, the teams I'm on, these are not somebody who works for the governor or the congressman or the president. They work in the same desk for 1, 2, 5, 15 years. Almost every political campaign, it may be except for a presidential campaign. I mean, these are often 6 months, 12-month engagements where a team of professional consultants and campaign staff come together. So that's why I had this focus on sports.
Yeah, it's like a season. You're at best, it's a season,
Absolutely.
Part of a season.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that quick time frame seems to work with sports as a metaphor as well. So you got to build that team quickly, and
And one of the great analogies we came across, there's a coach who was arguably the most successful college basketball coach on the men's side, John Wooden, and he used to always tell his players, don't look at the scoreboard. In every moment, give 100%. And so it's a great analogy in campaigns, and frankly, I think in almost every part of life, that maybe even as you're parenting or in your family, it's like, if you think things are going well, maybe you take your foot off the gas, don't do as well. But he would talk about, play 100% no matter what the score is. You don't pay 50% when you're ahead and 150% when you're behind. And it's probably another version of be all you can be. But in politics, I see it on political campaigns. Somebody's way ahead and they get complacent. They get cocky. So don't look at the scoreboard. Try to win every day and try to have a perfect execution every day, as opposed to get really focused when you're in trouble and instead get unfocused when, things are going well.
The phrasing, there's the cliche, all's fair in war. Sports have rules, although,
Right.
some people complain about how
Right.
they might be applied. The refs
Right.
are cheating us or whatever. But, in terms of a political campaigns, would you say is it all's fair, like all's fair in war? Or are there general guidelines that are followed, would you say?
Well, there's certainly some guidelines 3 or 4 years ago I thought were close to laws of physics that burners you just didn't place your hand on, that I think the Donald Trump era has made you
Okay.
wonder if those rules of engagement have changed. But I also think he's such a unique personality and had such a big brand before he ran that I don't know that anybody else could maybe survive some of the things that he has survived. But I think there are some general guiding principles of campaign advertising, which is what we do. And technically you can say about anything you want to legally in a campaign ad, because the Supreme Court has protected political speech above all speech, especially from a candidate for office. So they can say, they have wide latitude to say what they want. But it used to be you would really pay a price for really patently lying. I think in the Georgia United States Senate race, the senator, the Republican woman who is a senator, she's pretty wealthy, and she kind of overstated her background as a waitress, for understandable reasons. And so I think she probably paid a little bit of a price for that. And so there's kind of like, what are lines voters don't want you to cross? And then there's what you technically, by ethical standards and legal standards, can do. And some days of the week, especially, my first 20 years in the business, again, I think it seems like Trump has maybe moved that needle, but I'm not sure it's moved for every candidate for every office.
Okay, yeah. All right. And so it hasn't, that is something that, I was curious about, has the sort of Trump, since 4 years ago, the Trump, as a winning candidate 4 years ago for president on that national level, did he kind of change the game, or not? Will that be a lasting way, that kind of aggressive, divisive way of politicking? Is that going to be a way of winning politics? Your title here is Championship Zen, Secrets of Winning Politics. That
Right.
seems to be a counterpoint to that. But do you think the Trump kind of aggressive, motivating his base very strongly at the expense of the other side, is that something that will continue, or not?
Well, his influence is going to be felt for a long time. I'm not sure all of us, whether you work in campaigns, and certainly a lot of the talking heads on TV, have totally decoded it. In a little bit of an ironic twist, I think due to the era we're in, no matter whether you want to lay it at his feet or just the contentious nature of politics, or the kind of the divisiveness of the technology with which we get information through social media, what we saw in 2020 was voters were really starved for, hey, what are you actually going to try to do positively? And so it used to be at the end of campaign season, the last couple of weeks before the election, I make campaign ads for a living, positive ones, negative ones, funny ones, dark ones. And it used to be that as you got closer to the election, the tone would get more negative. This time, what we saw was we actually got more positive progressively the closer we got to election day. And so I think that's kind of a, if you believe Newton's laws have universal application, equal and opposite reaction, we often see that in politics. And so I think we've seen a little bit of that. And I think there's just a tremendous amount of misunderstanding and misapplication of what Trump has done. I mean, one reason he was so successful, he had a $1 billion brand by the time he ran for president. He had this relationship with the American people that was totally separate from politics. I mean, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, George W. Bush. I mean, anybody who's run for president has been had a political brand. I mean, maybe since Eisenhower have we not seen anybody. He had a #1 television show. Ronald Reagan never even had a hit movie. I mean, and so I think the Democrats and a lot of people underestimated how well known and how deeply felt his relationship was. And so a lot of the things that he did that would have destroyed another candidacy in 2016, he was able to survive. And I think, people also probably underestimated the equal and opposite negative reaction to the Clintons and Hillary Clinton that happened. So, and then the other thing about 2016 was people wanted change. And no matter how much Donald Trump said or did things that, offended a norm, he still was a change candidate, and Hillary Clinton wasn't a change candidate. And I think this time that's part of what hurt him. People wanted change. He was not. He was the incumbent now. He could not be the inherent change agent. And so I think that's one reason he lost, among others.
Yeah. All right. So that's, the very, I think, much more insight than I think than all the letters, those lettery networks put together than you'll hear typically out there. So thank you for that. A little more in-depth, getting behind the facade. And in terms of those campaigning, it's almost like the positive, the negative ads. Is that sort of like playing offense or defense, or is that too easy an analogy?
Well, it's really playing to brain science. I mean, all the cognitive research that we have, whether this is about again, parenting or advertising, we know that the human brain remembers negative information on a 3-to-1 basis over positive. So it's one reason, even among your thoughtful members and people that are tuning in, the National Enquirer still sells a little better in your community than The Economist. Yeah. And so it's just there's a memorability factor. I think a lot of times elections are what people are moving away from, because I'm not sure the electorate is usually unified on what they want. Even when you have a great vision executed, a local mayor or a governor, like, a few decades ago, the lottery, for instance, in South Carolina was a big issue. It took a long time for people to get unified and a ton of money behind, we do want a lottery going forward. And that probably helped the governor win an election back in the day. But most of the time, people are very clear on what they don't want around politics. They're not always clear on what they do want from a policy or even a leadership style standpoint. And so, the negative ads, we have won very contentious races with 100% negative ads. We've never said anything positive about our client. We've defeated incumbents where we have run 0 negative ads. So it depends a little bit on the circumstance of if the political environment is working for you or against you. Trump ran hundreds of millions of dollars of ads this time and lost. He barely ran tens of millions of ads in 2016 and won. So the political environment was working for him a little bit better then. And so it's literally just what are the circumstances of the race? A little bit of what the candidate. Some candidates are just inherently have more things they're running on than others and feel strongly about getting them out. And then a little bit of it is if you only give people positive information, they're just not going to remember as much of it. And honestly, it's at some point, it's not all believable that you're going to, change heaven and earth once you get in office in terms of jobs and the economy and national defense. And so it also helps bring the differences into focus. Yeah. I mean, if you are advertising the University of South Carolina Well, to some degree, you may or may not be in sharp competition with Clemson or Georgia or whoever to get students. When you're advertising for a candidate, you've got choice behavior where we know this is going to come down to a very focused choice. And so, there is, you have to make that clear of what the differences are sometimes. And that can be a very negative, play a little exorcist music in black and white, or it can be you can have a little bit more fun with it too. So there's lots of ways from a tonality to deliver a campaign ad.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a powerful scientific fact that you just quoted, that 3-to-1, that the human brain remembers that a negative instance, a negative fact, rather as opposed to a positive one, 3-to-1. And so and you said the rules kind of have loosened up. The U.S. Supreme Court protecting political speech. You can, say your candidate, the opposing candidate turned somebody into a newt or something, into a toad, and and sure, why not? It's not defamation anymore.
If you think about some of the most famous comparative advertising in the corporate world, like Mac versus PC, for instance, and but there are certain things Apple cannot say about Microsoft or about a PC or Microsoft, and so just there are laws on the books that you can't lie about another company to make more money, essentially. But in politics, you have a much broader range, and when you see a lot of these super PAC ads or these ads that are paid for an entity that's not the candidate, now those entities actually have to fit within a more corporate consumer protection advertising guideline, so they have a little less latitude in what they can say.
All right. So can you give us, John, what would you say were your 2 or 3 top insights that you've gained between sports and politics?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I think one thing that's interesting is whether it's players who are leaders on teams or coaches, that some of the all-time greats, and due to my interest, I focused a lot on football, basketball, a little bit of Olympic sports and whatnot. But there are a lot of different styles of successful leaders and coaches, and then also players. And so I think the leadership style, I think when I was raised, you kind of thought that the successful coach was maybe more of the military general Bob Knight school of yell, be a real hardcore, almost mean. And I think the same thing is kind of what we believed about being a CEO. I mean, it's just you really need to be hardcore and be tough on people, almost this Jack Welch or Henry Ford sort of imperious leader. Most of the successful coaches and player leaders in the last few decades are not of that ilk, and so there's a lot of different styles. Michael Jordan is a totally different sort of leader than Magic Johnson. Dabo Sweeney's a totally different leader than Phil Jackson, who coached the Bulls. And so I think it's almost as important to have a style that is true to thyself. Shakespeare said, to thine own self be true. And I think that's a real important thing in terms of your leadership style. Instead of trying to become mean when you're a little bit more of a low-key person, or try to be zen when you're an intense person, I think it's not going to work for you. And so that was a big insight. There was something that I think anybody who's ever managed people knows that if you treat everybody exactly the same, that's probably not going to work. People come from different places. People are motivated by different things. And I came across something, the guy who's presently the coach of the Tennessee Titans. I thought he articulated this better than any management book I've ever seen, any military general or coach. He said, we're going to treat our players the way they treat the team. And so I think that's a pretty good guiding principle. Again, whether you're in your family with your kids, whether you're in a company, whether you're on a campaign team, hey, we're going to treat you the way you treat the team. And so if you don't treat the team well, it's going to be a little harder, tougher relationship if you do the things you're supposed to do. So I thought that was a great guiding principle. And I mean, a lot of the other things are, I mean, if you're running a Taco Bell or you're managing a call center, you know, the level of employees you have may require some different leadership techniques. When you're on a sports team, it's about leading A players. And when I was on campaign teams, these are all people who are the best at what they do. So I think the difference between managing people in general and managing A players, there were a lot of insights. And two stories, you know, come to mind. One is the person that's considered maybe the greatest football player of all time, Jim Brown from the 50s and 60s. The owner of the Cleveland Browns didn't like that he was late to training camp one year because he was making a movie. Jim Brown, one of the greatest running backs of all time, the greatest football player at the time he was playing. And so the owner started fining him every day he was late for training camp. At the end of his career, he's still the top running back. And so Jim Brown was planning on retiring in a couple years. And so he quit and never played football again. Yeah. So to think you're going to browbeat an A player like Jim Brown into doing what you want is, that was a miscalculation on Paul Brown's part. And I think the former coach of the Lakers and Chicago Bulls and the NBA, Phil Jackson, I think he was a big believer in creating an environment where these A players are self-governing. And so he was almost known for what he did not do. You know, he wasn't being overbearing or giving constant feedback or being kind of that prototypical coach screaming from the sidelines. He was known by what he didn't do. But also creating an environment where these high performers, the pack governs each other. And so, I mean, I think of all, I've written a few articles about this, and of all the things I've put out there, people who think of themselves as high performers, you know, give me a leadership, create the right environment, but don't overmanage me. Don't micromanage me is how to manage A performers is one of the big insights that I came through all this. And there's also some great examples of just these coaches giving already talented people, already best in class members of their team confidence in important situations. And so, again, I think that's a universal thing, whether you're raising your kids, whether you're on a campaign team, whether you're getting a candidate ready for a big debate, whether your company's trying to survive the COVID crisis and move on, giving people confidence at the right time is a great skill. And maybe one of the more inspiring stories I ever heard is actually not from a famous athlete, but the writer Michael Lewis. He wrote Moneyball and Blindside, and he wrote Liar's Poker back in the day. So he's kind of a journalist, but he wrote this entire book about his high school baseball coach, or his Pony League baseball coach, when he was in New Orleans growing up. And he was the youngest player on the team, and he got put into the game, in the championship game, in the last inning. Youngest player, skinniest player. And so he goes out to the mound in a situation he's entirely not ready for. And this is how his coach gave him confidence, which I think is one of the most brilliant, inspiring things I've ever heard. He gets to the mound, gives Michael the ball, and he says, "Michael, there's no one I'd rather have in this situation than you." And there were one out. He needed to get 2 outs. And he says, "I want you to pick that guy off a third, strike that sucker out at home plate, and then let's go home." And so Michael struck the guy out, picked the guy off third, and they won the game. Yeah. And I thought it was just amazing. And then as he's coming off the mound, he says one other thing to this 13-year-old kid, which Michael said has changed his life. And, you know, he turned into this amazing writer, and, his books have been made into films, and he's kind of a influential personality. As he comes off the mound, the coach says this to him. He says, this is who you are.
Yeah,
And so Michael Lewis did not go on to be a great athlete. I think it's also gives you a sense of why there is a connection to sports and other areas. But he said that gave him the confidence to go on and do other things in life. And so anyway, I mean, it's I think there's a lot there for about anybody. So
yeah. And when you were telling the story, all of that, the different management styles, certainly, and that's a cultural changes as well. But and the different managing different players, different talent levels, but somehow merging them. You can see how that certainly with different campaigns and different levels and different team members, and of course, the candidates need that confidence at key moments that you got to go out and perform, and you've got to be able to do that. So all those,
Well, in the Phil Jackson approach of, often you think of an advisor or a campaign consultant or a coach, again, as somebody says, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. And a high-performing person can only take so much advice from another person. And so sometimes if I have a candidate about to go into a debate, I try to, I learned this later as I put together some of these sports stories, but I would not try to clutter their brain. Again, it's about what I don't say. Somebody's about to go into the arena of a debate, which is one of the most stressful things any candidate can do, because they could make a career-ending mistake. And there's no new advice. There's only project confidence. Or I have a candidate who's launching his campaign in the next few days, and he's like, "Hey, any last sight?" And I'm like, "You are ready." I mean, at this point, every now and then you might say, "Don't forget to smile every now and then," or something like that. But I mean, it's really no time to fill somebody's brain. They're either ready or they're not. And I think there's a lot of cognitive research as well that whether it's studying for tests or you can only cram so much at the last minute. You've got to go into the field of play and then perform. So,
and I have to you inspired a memory in me, maybe a slightly repressed one, but growing up, one of my basketball coaches, I won't say his name, but here in South Carolina, he was the Bobby Knight. Before Bobby Knight, it's before I knew about Bobby Knight, but he was that old school, had a towel on his shoulder, sort of like Tarkanian, Jerry Tarkanian, but he would chew the towel. He would yell at the refs, scream at refs, every call. He threw a chair, got the folding metal chair across the floor. I remember one time got kicked out for that after cussing the refs. So he goes, and we have the young assistant coach, who's probably like 23, 24 years old, who then takes over like a deer in the headlights, and we're down 10 points at that time. And we go from Bobby Knight suddenly to, it was like Phil Jackson all of a sudden took over, the Zen master. And it was a complete revolution, because his advice, he huddled us up and he looked over and pointed to the other team and he said, because they were ahead, he said, "Do the same thing they're doing, except backwards." And we all just sort of, there was so much tension. And then we all just kind of looked at each other and laughed, and then went back on the court, and we actually won the game. We came back and won. And so that was just, it was our moment of Zen, I guess, from what you're saying. But it kind of plugged into another side of, it managed us in a better way. The Bobby Knight thing will work for some players. He was a successful coach. It's a different style, but once he'd kick chairs and throw chairs in practice. We'd had enough of that, and it just wasn't working.
Coach and add that to my book. I wonder if that's also not an example of another one of the huge things you see time and again, and this transcends the world of politics and coaching and sports, is embrace adversity adversity is your friend. I mean, I think something got triggered in your team's brain. The coach is gone, so we got to get focused, whether your assistant coach inspired that or not. But I mean, I think one of the things, if there's anything we all know about our life is difficult. There's always, thumbtacks in the road ahead.
Yeah.
And every great team that was formed, their mettle went through the foundry due to adversity, due to a big loss or an injury or something. And so I think, if you look at politics, every person who is elected president forever had lost a race before. I think from Lyndon Johnson up until Trump, every person who was elected president had lost at some point. And so I always say of my political clients, most of the worst ones are the undefeated ones, because they don't really know, they think every time they win, it's all about them, and as opposed to, and then that also inspires something that, most people may not like Tom Brady, but he had a great thing that he said when he came to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He said, part of the key to sports is you've got to make sure that the losses motivate you and that the wins don't make you complacent. And so kind of finding that balance. But embracing adversity is one of the themes through every great coach, every great team, and probably about every great political candidate that I've worked with or observed from afar.
Yeah. And those losses sting. They sting, I know, for you as the manager and the coach of that, but you got to move on. And, so that's, and learn from them, and not, so that's
and it's also probably why we don't have many undefeated teams, it's even in, I guess college football might be the exception, but still, in the NFL, there are very few undefeated teams, very few undefeated boxers of the history of fighting. That oftentimes the disappointing loss is what took somebody to another place to get better.
Adversity, defeat even matters, because that's part of building a stronger winner. And
I'm drawing a blank on who said this. I think this is somebody like from the business world, like Richard Branson or something. But they said there is no losing, there's only learning. It's and so if you can in the moment say, okay, this is challenging, but there's something to be learned here. Now we all aren't evolved enough or calm enough maybe to always do that, especially if it's a crisis, but there's huge insight in that.
That's a good overall sense of sports and politics and the connections between, these leadership styles, coaching styles, and managing political campaigns. Let's pivot now to, I said you've been very busy on the talk show circuit, among other things. Last 4 years, lots to comment on, but yesterday gave us particular things to think about, and on a couple of levels. First, the Georgia elections, but also the storming of the Capitol building by rioters or protesters in support of President Trump. So, would you take a crack at both of those, if you can, for us, and talk about those very current events and how, and can you make a sports connection with those?
Yeah. Well, I think the one, it's worth, everybody's probably sick of hearing about the Georgia election, no matter your political persuasion. But first of all, take a moment to wash around in our mouth what a unique event it just was. So first of all, control of the Senate came down to an election in January, not November. It was not one, but 2 United States Senate races. And then Georgia is one of the few states that still has runoffs, which is a little bit of a holdover from the Jim Crow era of Southern politics of trying to keep African American candidates from winning. That's why they had runoffs that maybe somebody can get 40, but a black candidate probably can't get 50% of the vote. So it came down to 2 races in runoffs in January for control of the United States Senate, right as Trump is doing what he's doing to try to, stir the pot after the election. I mean, we have never seen anything like it. And maybe the most significant non-presidential election in the history of the United States is what we just took in. And so one of the sports analogies of how politics has changed, I mean, I think a lot of voters, even smart people and informed people, they may think about politics as this one-on-one match, a tennis match or a boxing match, between 2 personalities. Lindsey Graham versus Jamie Harrison. Well, how these races are actually playing out is way more like 5-on-5 basketball or 11-on-11 football, because you don't only have the candidates and what they're doing, you then have all this spending and ads of what the parties are doing. And then you have a business group on the right and a labor group on the left, and a moral majority conservative religious group on the right and an environmental group on the left. And so what happens is it's hard to even stay in tune with what the actual candidate wants to say about themselves versus what the interest groups for and against them are saying. And it just becomes a flurry. The bad part of it is that, and maybe there aren't any good parts of it. There's technically more information out there. There's certainly a lot of ads. The TV station managers are just fine with it. But the candidate's voice gets drowned out, no matter how much money they have, by all of the other noise. And so in some of these races, 10 to 20%, maybe 5% of the information you're actually getting about a decision on an election is coming from the candidate themselves. Wow. And so that's Georgia.
Yeah, that's a shocking thing to hear. 5 to 10%.
$500 million was spent in that race when Al Gore and George W. Bush ran for president in 2000. Somewhere between 80 and maybe 130 million was spent. And so that Barack Obama broke all records in 2008. I think he spent $500 million on his race. So that race was effectively a presidential race, and that's outrageous. And maybe a lot of the wrong people made money off of that. But when you consider the historic nexus that came together, it's entirely understandable of why it happened that way.
Wow. So that's Georgia elections, and it sounds like at least 11 on 11, football with all the different, and, players rotating in and out too, it's almost like different, offense, defense, different, you got 47 players per side there. It's not a one-on-one boxing match, to say the least. So the candidate's like the quarterback, or maybe the punter even in there, it sounds like.
Exactly.
But and so that's a sports analogy for the Georgia elections. How about what happened yesterday, the pro-Trump protesters storming the Capitol building to prevent the House and Senate from certifying the Electoral College win for Joe Biden?
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty rough day, I think, no matter what your political leanings are. I mean, the thing that first got me motivated to be involved in politics, I had an internship to study the inauguration of George Herbert Walker Bush in 1989. And so we spent time in Washington studying that. And the thing that my biggest takeaway from all that as a 19-year-old who took for granted a lot of things about being, born who I was in the country where I was reared was we're the only country in the world that has this consistent tradition of a peaceful transition of power. And especially over hundreds of years. And, we've now we now essentially have taken a turn down the third world or Soviet world where there's not a democratic election and a peaceful transition of power. I guess as divisive and frustrating and bitter as politics is right now, I mean, the question that's almost raised is our sports becoming more like our politics, or can our politics, take on the best quality of sports? I mean, it sure feels like we could use a good Olympic Games, story where we've got the Miracle on Ice team, or our World Cup women's soccer team, or a Michael Phelps, or I don't know. I mean, what's hopeful is, maybe we can galvanize in that way. You think about something that's going on this year, you like what's going on in Tampa, where, they're in the middle of COVID and things like that. And they have Tom Brady comes to the Buccaneers, they win the Stanley Cup, their baseball team goes to the World Series, and just psychically, I mean, it's for a lot of people in that region, in the Tampa and St. Pete region, it's just like a manna from heaven to, get through this era. And so sports has that power to unify a community. I think in some ways, part of the challenge we have politically is we've almost taken this our team versus your team, red jersey versus blue jersey approach of, we will apologize for our jersey and we'll hold the other jersey to an unrealistic standard. It's almost like, somebody on the other team got a parking ticket, and so they should be banned from sports. And somebody on our team, used performance enhancing drugs and was accused of domestic abuse. But we ought to get the facts before we really condemn that person on our team who's done something patently worse, and if not patently illegal. And there's probably a lot to be thought about there. I mean, we're really in this blue jersey, red jersey mode where we don't like the other side no matter what they do, and we'll defend our side no matter what they do.
Yeah. And that it does seem to be, it's red flags, blue flags, waving. And we talk about motivating a base and speaking to a base. And it seems like it's almost like you can just interchange fan base. It's become that, a rabid fan base, and making your base as motivated and rabid and gung-ho as possible. But can we, that's sort of been the signature lately, but is there, can we learn from sports and kind of have a red and blue together, as I'm, modeling this kind of ridiculous outfit? It's a little, even by my standards, John, this is garish, but the red and blue here. But is there that, sports usually after a game, hard-fought game, like candidates do, you can see peaceful transition of power. You shake hands at midfield after the game or at midcourt, and that's important.
The book Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, Team of Rivals, about Lincoln, how all he put together this group of people who are all political rivals, and it seems inconceivable right now to do something like that. And after we had happen yesterday, what happened at the Capitol, and been through this year of the election, and with Biden and Trump, it's hard to be hopeful about that. But I mean, I guess going back to the laws of physics, hopefully there will be an equal and opposite reaction. I mean, I think we've had a descent in the dialogue over the years, and so hopefully we can go to a different place. I mean, it's going to be very interesting what the Republicans who want to run for president next time. I mean, does it almost become a law of physics to get the Republican primary victory, which is very different than the entire group of people that vote for Republicans? You're talking about 10 to 20% of the people that you get in the general election as a Republican is who actually nominates, and the same thing on the Democratic side. Do you almost have to be like Trump to win that, or will there be an equal and opposite reaction among Republicans? People in the middle of the road are just disgusted with everything going on, and then the Democrats have their own issues in terms of you've got the Biden and AOC don't have a lot. It's hard to put together a lot of things they see eye to eye on, except for they're kind of in the same party and maybe supported the same person for Speaker of the House right now, and so there's an equal amount of, not equal, but there's tension on the left that frankly we didn't used to have 20 and 30 years ago. There's really no such thing as a conservative Democrat right now, because a lot of them used to be from places like South Carolina. There aren't many in Congress anyway, or Senate. There might be some in the locally elected, but there used to be conservative Democrats in places like South Carolina and all over middle America. And honestly, there aren't many Republicans who will speak out against Trump over the course of his presidency. The couple who did it cost them their jobs, really. Bob Corker, a senator from Tennessee, all he did was just kind of on a few things stand up to the president. Senator Flake, the senator from Arizona. I mean, Flake and Corker wanted to stay in the Senate. They got sideways with Trump, and it became a career decision. And so the truth to power component that most senators and great political leaders have had throughout our history is I think it's under assault right now. I mean, it's there's a saying, I think it's Mark Shields, the outgoing commentator from PBS. He used to say that a party that is more in search of heretics than allies is one that's going in the wrong direction. But I think there are some days of the week, both of the parties are more focused on purity or finding heretics within than, I mean, look at what Trump and the fight he's had with different Republicans in Georgia, in addition to some of the things, AOC and others said almost the day after the election. And so it is, I don't know that I've cracked the code on the solution today, but I did my best.
It's astute commentary, and, we can hope for some, as you said, will politics follow the best side of sports, or will it, it might go the other direction, and vice versa. Sports can take on some aspects of politics, positive and or negative, but there is a lot in the balance there. And we do seem particularly out of balance where, we talk about a return to normalcy, but there's been a lot of emotionalism lately in politics, and maybe a return to reason or reasonableness might be what we need on all sides.
Well, and it's not galvanizing to talk about working together. I mean, when we look at who gives and gets active in political campaigns, it's usually people that are not kind of moderate people in the middle. And so you're kind of community-oriented, Chamber of Commerce Republican, or moderate to moderate conservative Democrat. I mean, those are not the people that are sending in $25 from Wisconsin to Jamie Harrison, or sending in $26 from Louisiana to Lindsey Graham. And so there's a little bit of supply and demand going on to get the support you need. You kind of have to ring those bells on the wings of your party. Whereas if you really got down to it, the broad swath of the electorate's like, gosh, can we get some things done, as opposed to just get in another fight?
Hopefully, play the game, score some points. Maybe hockey's the analogy for that one. Let's try to score a goal instead of just erupting in another fist fight on the ice. An occasional fist fight is okay, but when it's majority fist fight, it's starting to be starting to change the nature of the game.
I went to a boxing match and a hockey game broke out, and
there you go. All right. Well, let's that we can pause there and see if we have. Thank you, John, for all that. That was great. And I'm looking and I'm seeing if we have any questions, if anyone wants to weigh in out there, and you're welcome to type in a question for John Rowley, our political consultant, and hit on the Facebook page for us, the GCL Facebook page. And as we wait and see, John, if anyone wants to pick your brain, pluck out some other nuggets of wisdom there, how would you, if you're the coach managing the talent, how would you manage Trump? Or how is that how would you have managed Trump maybe?
Yeah, well, I probably, first of all, I work on more of the Democratic side, and but I think even if there was a Democratic version of Trump, I consult and advise. That's my job, and I don't think Trump really wants consultation or advice from others. He's kind of a unique. He's totally unique in that he's kind of his own campaign manager, press secretary, strategist all in one. And when you consider that, what he's accomplished is pretty amazing. But an advisor whose advice is not taken, there's not really much reason to be around for a while. And I also, before I work with somebody, I try to get a sense of, do we have good chemistry and things like that. So I probably wouldn't have ever worked with somebody who just is a little bit of a free roaming radical like that. I like people who know what they want to do, but he's also not much of a teammate. It's kind of, he's the star player and it's all about him, and a campaign is all about kind of working together. And it's interesting. One of the more fascinating things that is about being on a team comes from not one of my favorite players, but a guy named Isaiah Thomas, who played for Detroit Pistons and one of the great point guards of all time. And he one time said, you know what the secret of basketball is? He said, the secret is it's not about basketball. It's kind of about having, and I think this may be a way forward in politics. It's if you think about servant leadership and whatnot, it's not about basketball. It's how this team can put the team first over self-interest, points, statistics, awards, big contracts. And, it's, I think there's, we sure could use some servant leadership around politics where, it's people putting the George Washington style. I think today's the anniversary of George Washington winning the first election in 1789. And, classic example of servant leadership, Nelson Mandela, and so at great times of crisis, some servant leadership, or at least people who are putting team or country ahead of their own self-interest. And but I always thought that was great, that the secret of basketball is it's not about basketball. It's about, and if you think about the great teams, especially professionally, that kind of fall apart, another coach, Pat Riley, used to call it the disease of me. You want more stats, more minutes, more money, more glory, and which is inversely proportional sometimes to the success of a team.
Yeah, that meanness, and it can work for a while, I guess, in a highly individualized sport, tennis or boxing. But even they have teams and managers and coaches behind them. But not on a team sport.
The one of the great considered the greatest team player of all time is Bill Russell. He won
Yeah.
11 championships for the Celtics in the 60s and 50s. He had a great way to bring all this together, because you have to be motivated for what's good for you too. And he used to say, my ultimate needs of ego are fulfilled by the success of my team. So you also can't dismiss that, hey, we all do things based on self-interest. So
Yeah, but merging that's merging the individual interests to the interest of others, or the higher interest. So servant leadership. That's kind of the basic idea of America. That's American
Right.
democracy. That
when we're at our best, anyway.
Yeah, at the ideal, we should say. Going back to Tocqueville and all that. So. But good, Bill Russell might be a great place to end things, because he was one of the greatest, if not the best. And as a team player, as you said, you might say Michael Jordan or LeBron James as individual basketball players would take the laurel, but Bill Russell was that ultimate team player.
Absolutely.
Well, John, thanks so much for being here with us today. That was a terrific job. And when does campaign season really kick up again for you?
Well, there are always, by law, elections happening somewhere, whether they're municipal or whatever. Like, in 2021, different mayors and all over the country, and South Carolina will be elected. So there almost every month there's an election somewhere. We just, we were involved in dozens of them in 2020, and we'll be involved in maybe a dozen in 2021. So it's, and then people are already gearing up for, governor's races and other things, Senate races in 2022. So there's always political activity and people gearing up for the next big election.
There's never really a full off season. You have a little break after November, I guess. Those are the playoffs. But
absolutely.
But never fully get the off season. You're always in training. So
yeah, absolutely.
But
always improving anyway. So.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thanks so much for spending time with us and giving us those insights. Sports and political campaigns. We really appreciate it, and looking forward to the book in development that will take all these ideas and give them in even more detail. So that's great, John. And John Rowley from CounterPoint Messaging in Nashville, Tennessee. And stay safe and be well there, John. And thank you again to our friends of the Waccamaw Library, and to Truman Wins out there, who's handling all the machinery to make this run smoothly, and to Heather Pelham doing the camera work. Thank you, John, and take care, and have a great 2021.
Thanks a million. See you later.